They all laughed when he said his grandfather dined with President Reagan, but no one was laughing when Arnold Schwarzenegger walked in with a frame in his hands. It was just another gray Thursday at Jefferson Middle School, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the smell of pencil shavings, faint whispers of gum wrappers crinkling in desks. In room 214, Mrs. Ellison stood at the whiteboard, writing out the day's lesson in practiced, looping cursive family connections to American history. A few students groaned, some perked up, most just scrolled. She turned with her usual over-enthusiastic smile. "Let's hear from you all today," she said. "If anyone has a story about a family member connected to a moment in American history, now's your chance." Nathan sat 3 rows from the back, second seat from the wall. He wasn't the kind of kid you notice twice. 13, skinny, soft-spoken, with sleeves always tugged over his hands and a backpack that seemed too heavy for how little he said. He rarely spoke unless called on, never volunteered, never challenged. Until today. His hand went up hesitantly, like it might change its mind halfway. A few heads turned in mild surprise. Mrs. Ellison blinked, then nodded. "Go ahead." "Nathan." He stood, slow and small, clutching the strap of his backpack like it was a lifeline. "My grandfather," he began, voice barely above the hum of the air conditioner. "He once had dinner with President Ronald Reagan." There was a pause. Then it started a single, sharp snort from the back corner, a ripple of laughter, small at first, then louder. Brittany, the girl with perfect hair and a phone she never put down, said it first. "Was it at Planet Fitness?" More laughter. Another boy was the Terminator. The waiter, Mrs. Ellison half smiled, uncertain. She held up a hand. "Let's be respectful," she said, though her tone lacked weight. Then, glancing back at Nathan, she added, "Maybe try to keep stories grounded in personal experience." That one stung. Nathan didn't argue. Didn't explain that the dinner happened in 1988 during a White House event honoring youth wellness advocates. That his grandfather, Arnold Schwarzenegger, had been invited not as a movie star, but as the chairman of the President's Council on Physical Fitness. That Reagan had personally thanked him in front of senators and school kids alike. He didn't say any of it. Instead, he sat down, slowly. Inside the front pocket of his backpack was a tiny, worn keychain photo. 2 men in suits, one square-jawed, the other smiling beneath the White House seal. But he didn't hold it up. He just looked at it, thumb brushing the edge like someone gripping an anchor while the room around him swayed. To the rest of them, it was a joke, a fantasy, the quiet kid making things up. But to Nathan, it was one of the only stories his grandfather had ever told with pride in his voice and fire in his eyes. The kind of story you only need to tell once. If someone is willing to believe it, before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. By lunchtime, the joke had a life of its own. No one knew exactly who had recorded Nathan's soft voice claim on their phone. Just the sentence, "My grandfather had dinner with President Reagan." That was all it took. By third period, it was clipped, filtered, and layered with an AI-generated voiceover mimicking Arnold's signature accent. "V train with the president, V bench press democracy together." Then came the explosions, synth music, laser effects. The background flashed with red, white, and blue. A crudely photoshopped Nathan flexed between Reagan and a bald eagle. The caption read, "Metrolympia Jr., and the views came quick. By the end of the school day, the clip had made its way through half the student body. Brittany reposted it with crying, laughing emojis. Derek stitched it with a video of himself doing fake bicep curls and yelling, "I'm Nathan's grandpa now." Even the substitute math teacher chuckled when someone played it in the hallway. Nathan didn't check his phone. He didn't need to. He could feel it. The stares. The subtle whispers that weren't even trying to hide anymore. "Is your grandpa gonna drive you home in a tank? Hey, Nathan, can he autograph my dumbbells?" He walked slower than usual. Not because his backpack was heavy, but because everything was. At his locker, a printout had been taped to the metal door. A meme. His face cropped from an old school photo had been pasted onto a cartoon bodybuilder. Beneath it, bold block letters screamed, "Top 5 lies heard in school." 2. My grandpa is the Terminator's cousin. He tore it off and shoved it into his bag. No one was pushing him. No one hit him or yelled. That would have been easier. Instead, they laughed. Casually, constantly. Like he was the punchline to a joke none of them had to think twice about telling. In the cafeteria, he sat alone. His usual spot, third table from the vending machines, now had a 3-seat gap on either side. The silence around him was loud. Not total, not cruel, just isolating. From a nearby table, someone whispered, "Hey, Nathan, what's for dessert? Presidential protein shakes." He didn't respond. Instead, he looked down at his sandwich, untouched. In his head, the words came back, the ones his grandfather had said years ago, sitting together on a porch at sunset. You don't need to shout for the truth to matter. You just have to survive long enough to let it stand. But today, the truth wasn't standing. It was being memed, mocked, muted by laughter that never asked to understand. And Nathan, for all his stillness, felt smaller than ever. The hallway buzzed like a beehive the next morning. Nathan kept his hood up and his headphones in, but no music played. He didn't want sound, just a buffer between him and the world. A way to make it look like he wasn't listening, even though he couldn't help but hear. "Yo, Mr. Muscle Memory. Did your grandpa teach Reagan how to do squats or just to invade countries' laughter?" Louder today. Not cruel, just, careless. He walked with eyes down, shoulders slightly hunched, navigating the building like a shadow that didn't want to be seen. When he reached his locker, there was another flyer waiting. This one was even more elaborate, his face pasted over Arnold's body from an old Predator movie poster. The title had been changed to The Impostinator. A line beneath read, "He didn't come to chew gum. He came to lie about Reagan." He didn't flinch, just folded it twice and slid it into his bag. In gym class, Coach Hendricks smirked as the kids lined up to run laps. "All right, let's move. Unless someone here thinks they're presidential material." "Right, Nathan." The class burst into giggles. Nathan jogged forward without a word, heart hammering somewhere between his stomach and throat. By the time he got home, he felt like he'd run 100 miles underwater. He didn't speak to his parents. His dad was on a work call. His mom was helping his little sister with math. No one asked how school was. No one noticed he didn't answer. He climbed the stairs, closed the bedroom door, and sat at his desk in silence. Then, carefully, like it was made of glass, he reached for the small wooden box in the drawer. It was old, scratched at the edges. The latch stuck slightly, but he knew the trick to opening it. Inside, wrapped in a soft piece of cloth, was a full-size photograph, faded but real. President Ronald Reagan seated beside a man in a crisp black suit, tie slightly askew, smile unmistakable. His grandfather, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Behind them, the White House emblem, etched in gold. Nathan ran his thumb along the bottom of the frame where a note had been written in pen. "To Arnold, thank you for standing strong for America's youth. R. He had stared at this photo dozens of times since he was little. Not because of who was in it, but because of what it meant. It was proof of something real, something earned. But now, in a world of filters and deep fakes and AI punchlines, it didn't matter. He could hold this truth in both hands, frame it in gold, carve it into marble, and still, no one would care, because the joke was easier to share than the truth was to believe. And right now, it felt like no one believed him at all. Friday, first period, gym class. The smell of old sweat and vinyl mats filled the air as Coach Hendricks barked instructions like he was prepping them for a boot camp. The floor squeaked beneath sneakers. The basketballs thudded like slow drums in the background. And the wall-mounted speakers blared 90s rock no one had asked for. Nathan stood in the corner, Arms at his sides, eyes on the floor. His name wasn't called, but it didn't have to be. The moment he walked in, a few boys started snickering like they were holding in fireworks. One of them mimed a bodybuilder pose. Another whispered, "Make way for Mr. Olympia Jr." Coach Hendricks blew his whistle. All right, 10 push-ups, then 20 sit-ups, then a lap. And Nathan, his voice sharpened. If your grandpa trained the president, I expect presidential form. The laughter was instant, sharp, easy, and it echoed. Nathan dropped to the floor without a word. His palms pressed into the cool gym mat, his arms tensed not from pride, not from power, but from the pressure of holding everything in. The push-ups weren't the hard part. It was the silence afterward. "You all right?" champ someone called as he passed during the lap. "Need to call the governor for a pep talk." Nathan didn't answer. He didn't look up, but his fists clenched harder at his sides. Back in the locker room, someone had scribbled in Sharpie across his gym locker, "Get to the choppa." He stared at it for a second. Then he opened the door like it wasn't there. Nathan didn't cry. He hadn't, not since it started. He wasn't even sure if he could. Instead, he just moved slower, quieter, like his whole body had adjusted to carry something invisible and heavy. That night, he sat on the back steps of his house, looking out at the dark. The porch light buzzed above him, moths dancing in frantic loops. His phone was in his lap. The latest version of the meme had hit 30,000 views. Someone had edited his face onto a muscle suit, added explosions, and mashed it to techno music. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he locked the screen and let the phone slip back into his hoodie pocket. Beside him, the wind picked up slightly, brushing against his sleeves. He closed his eyes, and in the quiet, he heard it again, faint, but familiar. His grandfather's voice, from years ago, told beneath a night sky just like this one. People will always laugh first. It's easier than listening. But remember, Nathan, truth doesn't need applause. It just needs to outlive the noise. Nathan didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stayed there, letting those words sit beside him like armor no one else could see. Because tomorrow was Monday, and something was about to change. Monday came quietly. No special announcements, no banners, just the usual tired shuffle of students dragging themselves through the halls of Jefferson Middle, half asleep and halfway tuned out. The morning felt like every other except for the whisper. It started small. "We've got a guest speaker today," someone muttered near the lockers. "Some athlete or something." Principal didn't say who. By second period, the rumors had twisted. "It's a CrossFit guy." One student claimed. "No, it's a YouTuber." Another insisted. "It's some bald ex-NFL dude." Derek guessed, arms crossed with manufactured confidence. Nathan heard none of it. His headphones were in again, no music, just static silence. He sat in the second row of the gym bleachers, hoodie up, arms folded. Around him, the buzz grew. It didn't matter who the speaker was. No one ever paid attention to these things anyway. Guest speakers came and went. Most were ignored. Some were mocked. No one remembered them after lunch. The lights dimmed. Students settled. The microphone at the center of the stage stood alone. No one approached it. The principal wasn't there. No introduction, just a pause. And then, from the far left hallway, the one rarely used, came the unmistakable echo of steady footsteps. Slow, measured, confident. The door creaked open. A silhouette stepped through. He wore no suit, no tie, just a crisp white button-up tucked into jeans. His hair was silver at the edges now, but his posture hadn't aged. Broad shoulders, square jaw, eyes sharp as glass. He didn't wave, didn't smile. He just walked, one row at a time, heads turned, whispers scattered like sparks. "Is that? No way. Wait, is that him?" He reached the microphone and stopped. No notes, no podium shuffle, just presence. He looked out into the crowd calmly, directly, My name, he said, his accent unmistakable, is Arnold Schwarzenegger. The gym fell utterly still. Even the humming lights above seemed to pause. I heard some of you have been laughing, he continued, voice low but piercing, at a boy named Nathan, because he said I had dinner with the president. Silence. Arnold scanned the bleachers, his gaze never sharp, but never soft. You thought it was a joke. Something made up. Maybe something he said to get attention. He reached into a bag slung over his shoulder and pulled out a wooden object, wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it slowly, revealing a rectangular plaque, its brass plate glinting under the gym's tired lighting. He turned it toward the students. The engraving read Presidential Citation, Youth Fitness Leadership Award, 1988, presented to Arnold Schwarzenegger by President Ronald Reagan. He held it there. No explanation, no defense, just the truth, framed in silence. Nathan's breath caught. No one moved, because for the first time since all of it began, the noise, the memes, the laughter, the truth had finally walked into the room. Arnold let the plaque sit in the still air for a moment longer. Then, gently, he placed it on the podium. It rested there without drama, without spotlight, just quietly undeniable. He looked out again. That dinner, he said, happened in the East Room of the White House. I was invited by President Ronald Reagan in 1988, not because of my movies, not because I lifted heavy things, but because I was working with schools, with kids, helping them find strength, not just in their bodies, but in their minds. He walked a few steps along the edge of the stage. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't pace like a performer. He simply spoke like a man who had nothing to prove and everything to affirm. And Nathan, he said, his tone firm now, he told you the truth. A ripple ran through the crowd. Some students shifted uncomfortably. Others looked down at their shoes. Arnold paused. His eyes scanned the gym until they landed on a single seat in the bleacher's second row. Hoodie up, head bowed. He didn't point. He didn't need to. I didn't come here today to be applauded. He continued. I didn't come to silence anyone or to shame anyone. I came for one reason only, because sometimes, when the world laughs at a story, it's not the story that's wrong. It's the world that forgot how to listen. He reached into his bag again and pulled out an old photograph, framed in polished walnut. He held it up slowly. Inside the frame, President Ronald Reagan shaking his hand, both men smiling, seated at a long banquet table under crystal chandeliers. The White House seal shimmered faintly in the background. It was formal, presidential, real. This, Arnold said, holding it steady, is the photo Nathan carries with him. You didn't see it, but it was in his backpack while you were laughing, while you were joking, while you were mocking him. He paused again, and he never shoved it in your face. He didn't scream. He didn't try to prove anything. He just sat there and let the storm pass. The gym was dead quiet. Arnold turned slightly, his voice softer now. That's strength, he said. Not the kind you build in a gym. The kind that keeps you standing when no one believes you. A cough echoed from the far side of the bleachers. No one laughed. No one even shifted in their seats. Arnold placed the framed photo beside the plaque on the podium. Two truths, side by side. Two pieces of proof that, until now, no one had cared to ask about. I came here as a grandfather, he said. Not a star, not a politician, just someone who still believes truth doesn't need to shout to matter. Then, he stepped back from the mic, folded his hands, and stood in silence. And that silence, somehow, said more than any speech ever could. The gym remained still, so still that even the lights above seemed hesitant to buzz. Arnold stepped forward once more, a quiet movement that drew every eye back to him. He glanced at the AV table near the bleachers and gave a small nod. A student assistant clicked something on a laptop, and the giant projection screen slowly lit up behind him. Flickering into life was a grainy video yellowed at the corners, the kind of footage you'd expect from an old VHS tape long left in storage. No music, no effects, just the sound of applause, then a podium, then a voice. Tonight, we recognize Mr. Arnold Schwarzenegger not for his fame, but for his tireless work in encouraging physical fitness and youth development across this great country, said President Reagan, standing in front of the White House seal. His voice was steady, statesmanlike, on screen. Reagan turned toward Arnold and shook his hand. Thank you for your service to our youth. The footage froze on that handshake. Arnold turned back toward the students. This is what Nathan tried to tell you. He let that sentence hang like mist in the air. This is what you turned into a meme. No accusation in his voice, just weight. Like someone laying down a stone and asking the world to feel how heavy it really is. He took a few slow steps across the stage, hands loosely clasped behind his back. You made jokes, he said. Jokes about my voice, about my past, about a boy who said something true. He stopped in front of the podium again. But truth isn't a trend. It isn't designed for likes. It doesn't always come in loud packages or flashy edits. Sometimes, it's carried by the quietest kid in the room. Students shifted, less from boredom now and more from recognition. In the third row, Brittany's phone, once always raised, now rested face down on her lap. Derek stared forward, unmoving. No one whispered. Arnold tapped the edge of the podium once. You see, I didn't come here to reclaim anything. I came to remind you that not everything unbelievable is false. Some things are just extraordinary. And sometimes, extraordinary comes in the form of a small voice, a worn keychain, and a boy who didn't fight back when you laughed. He picked up the plaque and the photo again, held them for one final moment. Then he set them both back down. This time not as exhibits, but as offerings. You don't have to clap, he said gently. You don't even have to say sorry. But if a classmate tells you something real, something you've never heard before, maybe ask one question before you make a joke. His eyes scanned the crowd one last time. That question is, what if he's telling the truth? And with that, Arnold nodded once, stepped down from the stage, and walked through the center aisle in silence. This time, no one laughed. The plaque and photo stayed on the podium long after Arnold had gone. No one dared touch them. Even when the lights flickered back on and the principal stepped up to dismiss the assembly, she didn't move them. She simply stood beside them, cleared her throat, and said, "You're all dismissed," softer than anyone had ever heard her speak. The students filed out slowly. No noise, no laughter. Not even the usual sneaker squeaks and hallway chatter. Just silence and the strange weight that comes after seeing something real. That afternoon, the school janitor, Mr. Alvarez, was asked to place the items in a display case outside the main office. He did it carefully, wiping down the glass twice. Under the photo, a brass nameplate was added, "On loan from Mr. Schwarzenegger, White House dinner, 1988. Some students passed it on the way to class and slowed their steps. A few paused. None of them said anything, but they looked longer now. Their gazes didn't bounce away with smirks. They lingered. Nathan walked by it too, alone, like always. But that day, something felt different. A kid from homeroom gave him a small nod. Another just met his eyes, then looked away awkward, unsure, but not mocking. At lunch, Nathan sat at his usual table in the corner. Only this time, there was no extra space left between him and the others. A girl named Jess from science class sat down beside him without asking. She didn't say much, just opened her juice box and said, "Your grandpa's cool." Nathan blinked, then nodded. That was enough. Later that week, something new appeared in the hallway near the lockers, a bulletin board titled, "Before You Laugh." Students were invited to write anonymous stories, moments when they'd told the truth and no one believed them. The first was scribbled in small block letters. I said my dad was a refugee. Everyone thought I made it up. Another, I told my coach I was too anxious to compete. He called me weak. One by one, when the board began to fill, even Brittany, days later, walked up and pinned a folded slip of paper. No one read it aloud. No one needed to. Mrs. Ellison called for quiet in class on Thursday. "I want to say something," she said, standing at the front with both hands folded tight. "Last week, When Nathan shared his story, I didn't listen. Not really. I smiled through it. I let others laugh. I even told him to stick to something more personal. That was wrong. The room was silent. Not awkward, just waiting. I forgot that truth doesn't always come wrapped in proof. Sometimes it arrives in a whisper. And it's our job not to laugh, but to lean in. Nathan didn't say a word, but for the first time, when he walked down the hallway, he wasn't walking through it. He was walking with it, and that made all the difference. Nathan never posted about it. Not the video, not the speech, not the photo in the display case. While the rest of the school buzzed with secondhand whispers and grainy re-uploads, he stayed silent. He still walked the same hallways, still sat at the same lunch table, still pulled his hoodie over his head on windy mornings. But something had shifted. He no longer clutched his backpack straps like armor. He didn't duck when passing by groups that used to mock him. He wasn't suddenly confident. He wasn't suddenly brave. He was just centered, like a house that had been reinforced from within. The video of Arnold's visit went online later that week, posted by the school's official account. No hashtags, no flashy title, just guest speaker at Jefferson Middle. April 10th. It didn't explode, it didn't trend, but it spread. Teachers in other districts shared it. Youth counselors messaged the school asking if they could show it to students. A quiet current of appreciation moved through the adult world like a wind finally realizing where it needed to blow. And still, Nathan said nothing. He was invited to talk to a local news station. He declined. A national education blog asked for an interview. He didn't respond. When a well-known author messaged asking to include the story in a book about modern youth resilience, Nathan wrote back just one line: "I'd rather let the truth speak for itself." That same week, Arnold posted a single photo on his social media. It showed the empty Jefferson gym after the event, the stage, the podium, the plaque still resting beneath the spotlight. The caption read, "Strength isn't how loud you shout. It's how long you stand for someone no one else did." It went viral, not the meme kind of viral. Not laughter or remix, but quiet resonance. Thousands of comments, many from teachers, parents, even strangers who wrote things like, "This reminded me of a boy in my class 20 years ago. I laughed when I should have listened. My daughter told the truth and was humiliated. Thank you for showing what strength really looks like." But Nathan didn't log on. He didn't need to. On Friday, as he left school, he paused near the front entrance. Just beside the flagpole, a first-grade class was finishing recess. A boy tugged at a teacher's sleeve and pointed toward the glass case. "Is that real?" he asked. The teacher nodded. "It is." The boy blinked. "Like, really real?" She smiled. "Very real." Nathan watched the exchange, unseen. Then he turned, hands in his pockets, and kept walking. He didn't want to be the hero of the story. He just wanted the story to be believed. And in a world where laughter could swallow the truth whole, sometimes surviving it was the most heroic thing anyone could do. 1 year later, Nathan stood backstage at a conference hall nearly 3 times the size of his old school gym. The lighting was soft, golden, the kind that didn't demand attention, but made the air feel warmer. Rows of chairs stretched into the distance, filled with teachers, parents, counselors, and a few hundred students from all over the country. The event was called Voices Worth Hearing, part of a national summit on education and emotional resilience. Nathan hadn't applied to speak. He hadn't even planned to attend. But someone on the planning committee had seen the original school video, the one with Arnold, the plaque, and the boy who said nothing. And they hadn't reached out to Arnold. They had reached out to Nathan. When his name was called, the applause was polite, expectant. He walked onto the stage in dark jeans and a gray button-up. Sleeves rolled, no script. Just a folded note in his back pocket, and a memory that lived quietly inside him. He adjusted the microphone with one hand. It was too tall. He didn't smile, but he didn't flinch either. "I don't really like attention," he began, his voice calm, steady. But sometimes, the truth needs someone to carry it, especially when it's been laughed at. The room leaned in. No scrolling, no whispering. Nathan continued. A year ago, I stood up in a classroom and said that my grandfather once had dinner with President Ronald Reagan. I didn't think it was extraordinary. Just a memory, a story he'd told me. Something real. He paused. I didn't expect anyone to believe it. I also didn't expect the laughter, the jokes, the videos. And for a long time, I thought maybe I'd done something wrong by saying it out loud. He looked out at the audience, then down at his hands. But then, he said, something happened that changed everything. My grandfather showed up, not to defend me, not to make a scene. He just stood there with the truth and let the noise die around it. From the front row, a man sat with arms folded, silver at the temples, eyes calm, Arnold Schwarzenegger, no bodyguards, no attention-seeking, just present. Nathan reached into his back pocket and unfolded the note. He didn't read it. He just held it. I learned something that day. He said, truth doesn't need fans, or applause, or edits. It just needs one person brave enough to say it and let it stand. He stepped back. There was no roar of cheers, no music swell, but the room rose to its feet, quietly, like a tide. Some wiped their eyes. Some simply nodded. Arnold didn't move. Just looked at Nathan with that unshakable stillness only time could teach. And somewhere in the echo of that silence, a boy who had once whispered a story no one believed had just become the reason people started listening again. If you enjoyed this story, let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories.